I'm Caroline O'Neill, and I'm very happy to be here representing L'Oréal Group as part of the Marie Claire Power Series Summit, Allies, Networks and Action. International Women's Day is a day to recognise and celebrate the achievements of women. But this day also marks a call to action, to collectively embrace equity and accelerate women's equality by acknowledging and raising awareness of the challenges that women continue to face each and every day. I'm hugely proud to work for a company that has a long history of empowering women and working with them to build the world of tomorrow. We want tomorrow's world to be fair, diverse and inclusive, and we want women to be part of shaping it. We express this commitment through a series of actions. First, with a charitable endowment fund to support highly vulnerable women, the L'Oréal Fund for Women. Launched in 2020, a €50 million charitable endowment, and secondly, through our brands, taking action, using their influence to raise awareness among partners, clients and consumers to advance the cause of women, contributing to a more inclusive society for women and girls today and every day. Through our brands programs, we are committed to supporting women by helping to prevent domestic and sexual violence, offering support for survivors, providing access to education, training and entrepreneurial opportunities, and working in partnership with women to build a more inclusive world. In the UK, this comes to life through a number of local partnerships. Our YSL Beauty and Women's Aid partnership, Abuse is Not Love, work to prevent intimate partner violence. It's still all too common for abuse to be wrongly justified as love. Our Longcom UK National Literacy Trust Words for Work initiative helps to challenge inequalities in employment opportunities for young women. And one very close to my heart as the General Manager for the brand L'Oréal Paris is our Stand Up Against Street Harassment initiative, delivered with our UK partner, the Suzy Lamplugh Trust, where we invite women and men to safely respond when they witness or experience street harassment. I want to thank all of our NGO partners who make these initiatives a reality. Thank you to Marie Claire and all of the incredible panellists for partnering with the L'Oréal Group for this special International Women's Day and bringing to the fore your powerful voices to support female empowerment, helping us all to collectively embrace equity and discover how each of us can play our role and be an intervening ally for women. One action we can all commit to is to take the L'Oréal Paris stand-up training to help prevent street harassment.
Hi, my name's Andrea Thompson. I'm Editor-in-Chief at Marie Claire, and I'm delighted to be here for a special International Women's Day panel to celebrate the power of allyship. At Marie Claire, women's empowerment is at the heart of what we do, but women can't feel empowered to live their lives to the full unless they feel safe in their communities. Sexual harassment and domestic abuse are problems that affect all of society and demand a collective response from governments, businesses, and from the public, men as well as women. I'm really looking forward to getting into some of the issues that surround this today with a brilliant panel.
I'm Caroline Noakes, Chair of the Women and Equality Select Committee in Parliament.
I'm Farah Nazir, CEO of Women's Aid, a national organisation working to end domestic abuse.
I'm Ben Hurst. I'm the Head of Facilitation at Beyond Equality, which is a gender equality charity that works to engage men and boys in the gender equality conversation.
Hi, I'm Dr. Soph, or Dr. Sophie Mort, and I'm a clinical psychologist and Sunday Times bestselling author.
Thank you very much. I'm going to start the panel by speaking to Farah, because Farah, you lead an organisation that, heads up this fight against violence against women. You're very much in touch with 160 organisations across the country who are at the forefront of dealing with this issue. Following the increased awareness about domestic abuse during COVID and lockdown, have you seen rates increase in terms of reporting? Are there better prosecution rates? Has any progress been made at all?
It's a complex question to answer. We're still in a context where 1 in 3 women will experience some form of violence from an intimate partner. We're still in a context where 1 in 4 young women will have experienced some form of violence in a relationship if they've had one. We're not in what you'd call a safe context right now. And we are still in a context where only 1 in 5 women will ever report to the police. So has reporting increased? I think the answer is no, reporting hasn't increased. Has awareness increased? I think the answer is yes. So awareness is the first step, but we still have a way to go before we see people feeling trust in the system, trust in the parts of society that are supposed to support women and their children who are experiencing abuse. And until we see more trust, we won't see more reporting.
What's the impact of partnering with a global campaign like YSL on large kind of awareness campaigns around, spotting signs and speaking directly to women?
It's absolutely invaluable. Partnering with L'Oréal, with YSL, has been amazing for the cause. Firstly, it gets the message out to so many women that, this happens to women, whatever they might look like, from all walks of life. This is a common experience shared by millions of women. In fact, we know that, it's the largest crime in the country against women. We know that hearing it from unusual voices, like the brands, it allows a reach that perhaps we don't have. But it also helps to shift society, because if brands like this are talking about it, then it mainstreams the conversation and it doesn't limit it to a charity talking about its issue.
How can we be better allies to the women in our lives that we suspect may be suffering in silence?
So I think the first thing to understand about women who are experiencing domestic abuse is that there is a lot of uncertainty there. There's often shame, there's often blaming. They blame themselves. The key thing is to ask the questions in a safe space, not to judge, and to allow to have the time she needs to really think about her response and her next steps. And importantly, if a woman doesn't want to talk to you about it, respect that as well, and maybe come back in a little while.
Caroline, in 2020, you were elected as chair of the Women's and Equality Committee. Can you tell us if there's been any progress made in terms of prosecutions of perpetrators of domestic violence in your time, and any other positive steps that have taken place?
So we saw in 2021 the landmark Domestic Abuse Act actually make it onto the statute book at the third attempt. So that took a great deal of effort to make sure it did get across the line. What matters to me, though, is not that we just have legislation. It's about enforcement. It's about giving women the ability to speak up, to come forward, and making sure that the support services are there for them, and also that prosecutions follow and follow successfully. We've also seen various other legislative initiatives come forward. So cyber flashing included as part of the online safety legislation. And we had an announcement in the last couple of weeks about making sure that perpetrators, when they have committed serious incidents of domestic abuse, are added to the sex offenders register, that they are put on tags when they're released so that they can't go close to their victims' homes. But it's very much a case of always making sure that the pressure is kept up, that we don't rest on our laurels, look back to a 2021 bill and think, well, that sorted it, because it hasn't.
You've obviously had experience of working on the front line when it comes to, tackling street harassment and also sexual harassment, which, came to the fore with the Everyone's Invited scandal. What have been the key challenges in tackling the problem when it comes to younger women and protecting them?
Well, I think there are a lot of challenges. And first and foremost, I think there is a cultural challenge. It's still seen as acceptable. And every time in Parliament that we raise the issue of street-based harassment, there will always be some who just say, well, it's banter. What are you trying to do? Outlaw wolf whistling. Well, actually, what we're trying to do is empower young women to have the confidence to speak up, to identify poor behaviour, and also, importantly, whether it's their male classmates or their friends, to call it out when they see it as well. We can't do this on our own. It has to be a combined effort, men and women, girls and boys, making sure that wherever it happens, whether it's on the street, whether it's in education settings, whether it's in the workplace, all of us feel empowered to identify poor behaviour, call it out, and make it culturally unacceptable to engage in that sort of activity.
Sophie, I'd like to come to you now and talk a little bit about the psychological impact of women being the targets of abuse, because according to the L'Oréal Paris survey, 80% of women have actually been on the receiving end of some kind of street harassment. What impact does that have on a woman's sexual development when she's growing into maturity?
It's a great question. I think firstly we need to say objectification at any age can have significant impact. The reason it's important to talk about it earlier on in life is because in the kind of first few years of development, you're finding out who you're meant to be in the world. And during your teens, you're really consolidating your identity. What am I good at? What am I valued for? Now, objectification is about taking one part of the whole, stripping it away from the whole, in this case, the body, making people believe that actually your worth is purely based on what you look like, your physicality. So if that's happening to you whilst you're going through these early developmental stages, your entire identity may be founded upon your physical appearance. So the impact of objectification at any age is a problem, but if it happens in those early years, it's sewn into the fabric of who we are.
And how about the impact of coercive control and an abusive relationship on a woman? How does that impact how she perhaps forms relationships after that and how she goes about her daily life, her confidence and her self-esteem?
Domestic abuse of all forms is seriously harmful to people's self-esteem, self-worth, their sense of self. Early on, so in the kind of short term, it may be that people feel denial, confusion. They might start questioning their own experiences of the world. Did that really happen? Could that person I know and love really treat me this way? But when it happens over a longer period, people's sleeping and eating changes, their executive functioning, so ability to make sense of the world and do complex kind of thinking, problem solving, diminishes. What we clinically might call anxiety, depression, and PTSD can emerge. You may notice that someone becomes kind of extremely tearful. They may become overly compliant. This means that they're looking for any place that they can meet the other person's needs, whoever that is, because this was a coping skill that they learned in the relationship that might protect them from harm. If I can do everything right, maybe I won't be hurt today. Maybe I won't be controlled today. When people repeatedly control you or abuse you, you start to question, what is my worth on this planet if people who love me, supposedly love me, could treat me this way? How can I trust my decision-making when I let someone like that into my life? You asked about how it affects people going forward, and I'm so glad you asked it that way, because I think we assume that once people are out of harm's way, that they will be safe. Actually, often when people leave an abusive relationship, there may still be coercive control, either through the courts, delaying action with the police, trying to make things difficult, and or because trauma actually exists within our body. It can come with us through life. The long-term effects of this kind of abuse is it can shape how you feel inside yourself, whether you feel safe or not, and affects every part of your relationships going forward because you've learned how to cope and survive in a very, very dangerous environment. Now, that doesn't mean there's no hope. Yes, I need to say that. But yes, it can have pervasive effects.
And we'll get onto the hope afterwards and how you can heal after these experiences. But first of all, I want to talk about male allyship, which is absolutely key to a conversation like this. And in your work, Ben, you really encourage boys to reframe the idea of masculinity, don't you? And to pull out other influences outside their immediate friendship groups and online. How do you do that?
It's a big question. How do we do that? The core of our work is about conversation, it's about exploration, and it's about equipping boys and men with tools to critically analyze what they're seeing around them in the world. So number one, we try and make it as fun as possible. But I think actually it's about opening up some space for them to really do some exploration for themselves. And that conversation often starts with them thinking about their own relationship to gender, right? So for most men, they've never been asked the question, when did they first become aware of their gender, or what does it mean for them to be a man? So we try and open up those conversations and give the guys some space to like pick those things apart. I like to frame it as like a deconstruction and reconstruction of masculinity. So looking at what we've got already, thinking about what we like about it, what we don't like about it, what's helpful, what's harmful, and then reimagining a version of that that is good for all of us. So good for us as individuals, but also good for our communities around us.
And that's really a preventative measure, isn't it? Because you're sort of getting the good messaging in there so they don't become the perpetrators.
Right.
Bystander intervention is really important, isn't it? How do we empower boys and young men to feel that they can actually intervene when they see something negative going on?
The beginning of the issue for boys is that post-Me Too, post Everyone's Invited, where we saw 16,000 women and girls come forward and talk about their experiences of sexual harassment. I think one of the impacts of that is that boys feel like they are being blamed for a lot of stuff. The beginning of that is to shift that paradigm a little bit and help them to see themselves as agents of change in their communities. I think also there's something that's really important about grounding this in reality for them. And I think boys like to think about these kinds of conversations as though they're happening away from us. So they're thinking bystander intervention, that's about me calling out or me tackling the person that's trying to attack someone in the street, as opposed to the 1 in 3 girls in schools who have experienced unwanted sexual touching. So trying to ground it in the reality that this is something that's happening around you that you're seeing, and helping them to view it in a slightly different way, where they're analysing what the things are that are normalising those behaviours. Because we know that it's not the majority of boys who are doing those kinds of things, but actually all the boys are complicit in some ways in perpetuating an environment where those things are allowed to happen. So helping them to think about what those things are that are happening, and then equipping them with the tools to challenge people, to call people out, to critically analyse those things for themselves so they're aware of what's going on, and then they can transfer that to their communities and to their environments and start having those conversations. And I think the other big part of it is about having these conversations before there's an emergency, right? So when we're talking about consent in schools, we use like a Fry's model where we talk about consent being freely given, being reversible, being informed, being enthusiastic, and being specific, and having that framework of understanding that this isn't just a conversation about yes and no. There's also loads of other factors, and therefore loads of other opportunities for me to intervene when I see something that I'm uncomfortable with. But also it doesn't have to always be a confrontation, right? I think that we have this vision of bystandership being like us jumping in and saving the day, as opposed to like supporting other people and equipping them with the tools to defend themselves. I think that's a big part of the conversation.
Yeah. Farah, I wanted to return to you about this, because you do a lot of education, don't you? Your organisation goes and talks to young girls and boys. Can you tell me about some of the programmes that you do in schools and, you know, some of the most surprising things that you've found?
So we run lots of different prevention programmes. One of them has been supported by Yves Saint Laurent called Expect Respect, and we've gone and trained over 70,000 young girls and boys. We find broadly the same things that you found, insofar as children and young people think that some behaviours are acceptable. So, for example, jealousy is often a concept that's romanticised. Pick any number of romance novels or teen movies, and jealousy and a measure of control is seen as appealing and romantic and the way forward. And people, young people in particular, just take that as read, rather than actually recognising that this could be the beginning of something that is quite dangerous. So we work to educate people, firstly, to trust their own instinct, but then we also support people to understand what the signs of abuse might look like, and if taken together, perhaps you should think about speaking to an adult or going to an organisation that might be able to support you or help you in some way. And we also work with schools, because often schools themselves don't have a whole school approach. They don't have multiple points of contact. So we work with schools to really ensure that their policies and their points of contact are robust and supportive. But we also do work with men. We often hear, it's not all men that do it, it's not all men that perpetrate. Of course it's not all men that perpetrate, but all men do have a responsibility to be allies and change the cultural environment within which we operate, within which misogyny and violence is broadly tolerated, particularly domestic abuse, which is still seen as a private home matter by the vast majority of the population. So I think our message is that there are bystanders and there are upstanders, and we really encourage all men to be upstanders and call it out. And going back to Caroline's point, we very much see violence against women and girls as a spectrum. Yes, it starts at banter. That it's absolutely critical that you address banter, because banter is where, as Dr. Sofa was saying, the objectification begins to happen and begins to create this permissive environment where violence against women and girls and domestic abuse is tolerated, and that there is a spectrum that goes right to the other end, where you start looking at more grave crimes and you start looking at things like homicide, and that is a spectrum, and it all starts at banter. So we do need to understand that these things are utterly interconnected.
Caroline, this is such a big issue. It really demands a collective response. How are the private and the public sectors coming together to fight for safety for women?
There have been some really great initiatives emerge over the past few years. First and foremost, during the pandemic, we saw the rail companies offering free tickets for women who were fleeing domestic abuse who needed to get to safety. But it's kind of down to people like me in Parliament to make sure that we see the Home Office recognise that a flea fund can actually not only save women, but it can also save the public purse, because that is an enormous amount of additional cost to services that potentially won't be spent further down the line. There's initiatives in pharmacies to ask for Annie, so you can go in and ask for a safe space, and also job centres. And I'm really pleased to see that the DWP has recognised the importance of training its staff in recognising the signs of domestic abuse and making sure that they can also provide a safe space for those who need to get out of abusive relationships. But it's all part of a picture, and it's absolutely imperative that first and foremost, what we are doing is encouraging and empowering victims to be able to speak up, to be able to ask for that help, which, unless you have a cultural shift on this, then they will still feel too anxious and apprehensive to do that.
Farah, looking at the more practical side of, watching somebody that may be experiencing abuse, what practical steps can people take to help those around them? And what are the signs that they can look out for?
If you feel as an individual that something isn't right in your relationship, it probably isn't right in your relationship. And there are many signs, and they include things like intimidation, feeling more isolated from your friends and family, being sort of routinely humiliated, being manipulated, being blackmailed, feeling like you're being controlled. And that can range from somebody suggesting that they really think you look lovely in a particular dress, and that might be quite flattering to begin with, but then slowly they begin to control all your clothing. Or it could be that there are cameras in the house and they decide actually, you can't go out at certain times. Could be that they limit access to your finances. So I think there are lots of different signs there. And if you put a few of those together and you don't feel comfortable, I think the first thing to do is to seek support from an organisation like Women's Aid. There are others out there too, the National Domestic Abuse Helpline, who can really support you to understand what's happening and talk to you without judgment, without fear, and just sort of understand what might be the next step for you. And also just validate your feelings. That's so important, to actually trust yourself and trust how you're feeling. And if you're a person who suspects that something might be going on with a friend or a colleague or a family member, first thing to do is to ask them how they're doing in a sort of safe space, if they've reached out for help, and to be able to provide some of those helpline numbers or those websites for them. Because often if you're in a situation like that, it's quite difficult to do that for yourself, because you're just trying to survive. You're just trying to cope with the situation around you. We often find that when women contact our helpline or our chat line or email us for support, it's been because a friend or a family member or a colleague has given them our details and has slowly sort of been helping them to think through things in a non-judgmental way, to a point where they feel able to contact us and have that conversation.
Sophie, how important are women's networks and friendships generally in, helping women to escape these sort of negative behaviours at home and abuse?
Extremely important. Networks of support can not only take on some of those practical tasks that you were just mentioning, they can send the message of, you aren't imagining this, you deserve something better. You deserve a different kind of love, because abuse is not love. And they can address that shame. A lot of the reason that people don't reach out to their networks is because they think, this is shameful somehow. There must be something wrong with me. When you have a group of people around you saying, and looking at you with eyes that say, I love you and you deserve better, your self-esteem is automatically boosted. So there's the very practical aspects in terms of offering how to get to safety. And then there's this very important emotional piece, which may sometimes just involve sitting down and being in the depths with them. Because actually often it's sitting in that darkness that allows people to start to feel light. Also, often when we have these talks, we assume that it only pertains to the people who are in it right now. But actually you might be listening to this and thinking, I got out of a relationship 10 years ago, 20 years ago. It is never too late for those networks to benefit you. It's never too late to feel the impact of sharing your story and having someone understand it. Or to go to something like EMDR, which means eye movement, desensitization and reprocessing, which is a form of therapy that can be incredibly helpful for trauma. You deserve better, and there is always hope at feeling better in yourself and feeling safe inside your body as well as inside your home.
Thank you, Sophie. Well, we've heard a lot of advice about what women can do. And I want to finish up by asking you, Ben, what one piece of advice can we give to the men in our lives following this discussion about how to be better allies?
One piece of advice is difficult, but it's a good question. The nature of this panel is a good example of what needs to happen. The start and the core of this is listening to other people, to listening to people's experiences, and to understanding them. And I've spoken a bit about men's relationship to power and privilege and what they can do with those responsibilities. It always reminds me of that, give a man a fish and he'll eat for a day, and teach him how to fish and he'll be able to feed a village. But I do think there's something about that kind of paradigm that becomes really, really important in terms of men giving other people skills and tools to do things or to make changes themselves. And I think if men can start by doing that piece of thinking and really thinking about how they're a part of that kind of issue, then we'll be able to move to a much better conclusion.
Thank you very much, Ben. Thank you so much to the panel for all their insights today, and to L'Oreal Group for partnering with us. Remember, you don't have to be an expert to be an ally. Happy International Women's Day.